Hey everybody, I'm Jack with Future Pastimes, and this is Battle Language, which is a discussion about something related to the Dune board game. And I'm joined currently by Jaded. Someone else may show up later on, so I'm bracing you for that. But we think that having the two of us talk about today's topic is more than enough. I also have some data because I've been talking about this topic with a couple of the other playtesters, just as we have been discussing what might be showing up in the new GameFound campaign. So, what is the topic? It is basically rating the different factions and trying to determine which ones would be considered a good beginner faction, which ones are the clearly advanced factions, and what kind of falls in the middle in sort of the intermediate zone. So we have these 12 factions, our 6 base game factions, and the 6 from expansions 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to talk a little bit about where we think we would put these. And I'll share a little bit of data from some of the other playtesters who are not currently part of the conversation. And then you can weigh in yourselves if you agree with where we settled, and let us know why not. This was first raised with me by a friend of mine, and saying, why don't the factions have this sort of rating system already in? Because Dune Imperium apparently has something like that. It's got some little dots, I think, on your different leaders that you could have for that game. So you're like, oh, it's my first time playing it. Give me a 1-dot guy. And I replied with, how would the world react if, when we said, yes, we've introduced this beginner, intermediate, advanced system, and all the factions started at intermediate and went up to advanced. There were no beginner factions, not everybody agrees with that. And I'm being a little bit silly with it, but if let's say you're just limiting yourself to playing advanced, and you've got more faction advantages in advanced and a little bit more going on. And so what are the best factions for do that? Because like Emperor is classically considered the faction that you give to the new guy who's playing Dune with your group. And that's because, especially in basic, he only does the one thing. He gets paid. So Emperor's pretty good. Only one other advantage in advance, and that's the Sardaukar. But even a faction as straightforward as the Emperor can be. You can make plenty of mistakes and really feel like you have basically screwed yourself, even fairly early on in the game, just because you don't fully grasp a lot of the nuances to how to play these factions very effectively. So this still probably will end up being, I think, for us, because it's the one faction that showed up on everybody else's beginner list from all the other people that I've had this discussion with. And since somebody's got to be a beginner faction, I think that's probably our safest bet. What do you think, Jaded?
I think I would agree. And I think Emperor is the perfect example of why this is such a nuanced topic because, yeah, they're very easy to play, but at the same time, I've always thought that Emperor is technically one of the most, potentially complicated in terms of strategy factions out there. And everyone kind of laughs because it's like, oh, yeah, they got like 2 abilities, and one of them is just you're rich. But because they're rich, there's really no strategy that is locked off to them. They've got the money, and in Dune, if you have got no money, you've got no options, and if you got lots of money, you've got lots of options. So there's a lot of different ways you could play Emperor, and so yeah, it's good as a beginner faction, but I think you can also express your knowledge of Dune with weird strategies or whatever. And I think when you're doing a system like this, it's obviously for, it's my first time. Which faction should I play? Or I've got a couple games on my belt. Maybe I'll try one of these more advanced ones. And for those purposes, I think it's about skill floor rather than skill ceiling. So, Emperor, very easy to play. Put it in beginner, even though they can be very complicated at the higher end.
Yeah, as many. I mean, I would say with almost no exceptions, this is the faction that I assign to the most novice player that's at the table, and whether it's they're a novice to Dune or board gaming in general, in either case, Emperor is who they're going to get. I rarely see them. In fact, I can't think of any time I've seen them win with the faction. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do great with this faction. Maybe in an alliance. Certainly, the Emperor is a pretty good ally for just about any player. And so you may be riding the coattails of a more experienced player who knows how to take advantage of your wealth and whatnot. But as opposed to like Cosmic Encounter, so there's a number of green alert aliens that I could give to a very novice player, and they could win that game. Their first time playing Cosmic Encounter. An alien like Loser, which is a very highly rated alien, so many options for winning encounters. Oracle is another green alert alien. You get to see what your opposing player is playing in the encounter before deciding what to play. Even something like Sorcerer, which can switch those cards. It's another green alert alien. So they can still be very powerful, and even somebody brand new to that game. But yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit going on in Dune that even having, a pretty strong faction. I think the Emperor in the hands of an experienced player can be very effective, but there's more to than just knowing I'm going to have a lot of spice and a quarter of my forces are double strength. It's easy to understand, but that's not necessarily a winning equation. There, you're going to have to still deal with the other factions, what kind of cards you get, and there's all the nuances of the game, the bidding round. The Emperor can always afford to buy a card, but often is paying a lot of spice for worthless cards. And so how do you overcome that? And there are ways, and an experienced player probably has picked up on those. I know that when I am playing with novice players, I try to advise them as much as I can, even when it's definitely against my self-interest. I'll say things like, you should bribe the Atrades for some card knowledge here. And even when I am Atrades, and people are like, you just want the spice. And I was like, believe me, I don't want to give him that card knowledge, but I do need that spice. And this is what I would do if I were in his shoes or her shoes, whatever. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's only so much you can account for a new player to Dune, and only so much guidance you can give them. They're going to have to learn certain things the hard way anyway, and you got to give them some faction. So I think, Emperor, that's a pretty universal choice there. And then from here on, it will get to be divisive as we decide what else is a beginner, or where does everyone else fall. So how do you want to go about this? Do you want to just try to figure out how to fill out the beginners, or should we just start going left to right with the remaining factions and then just see if we can get some consensus about where they go?
I mean, I was just going to go ahead and nominate Fremen next, just to get some of that divisiveness out early. Because
so you would nominate Fremen as another beginner faction.
Just to discuss.
Oh, to just discuss.
At the very least.
So where should they? So I mentioned that there are other players. So like Gary's one of our play testers. He's done some really good home brews recently, and a very canny player. He's put the Emperor in the beginners column. He has put the Fremen, in his opinion, they're an advanced faction.
And that's a take I would agree with.
Yeah, and now the another one of our testers, Boyer Dummy, who I think may have been in some battle languages with us, he has them as an intermediate. And then one of our newer playtesters, Captain Cold, has Fremen as a beginner faction.
Perfect.
I've settled on intermediate. I think that one of the most difficult things about Fremen for a new player is they have just so many advantages. They have more advantages than any other faction. And it's just a lot of these little things that they can do. Oh, you can do this with the Storm. You can do this with the Shai-Hulud. You can do this, in combat. And so there's a lot to keep track of, which for a very new player can be challenging. but each individual faction advantage is relatively easy to understand. Like the storm, they get to see the card and they flip it over and voila. So that's not hard. And a lot of them, it's just a matter of what phase is it, what can you do in this phase, and as long as you can kind of track with that, they're relatively easy to understand. But I think the reason that I would bump them up from beginner to intermediate is just the sheer number of advantages that they have. And certainly some of them do require some nuance. When an extra Shai Hulud comes up in the spice blow phase, where should you put that? Where should you ride the worm? There's a lot of interesting choices. You could ride it into a stronghold and block that stronghold, but blocking strongholds is a concept that new players have a hard time instinctively thinking about, and some of them are like, well, why would I even want to do that? I don't want to battle him. It's like, yeah, but you're battling him so that this player can't win this round, and we need to be able to get out in front, and it will require some sacrifice, but maybe you can make a deal to lessen the sting. And so these are all concepts that are not on the faction sheet, and a lot of them aren't even in the rules. So to understand how can I use my faction in ways that are not immediately evident is definitely an intermediate kind of a step, in my opinion. But what do you think about the Fremen? Where do they land for you?
Well, see, this is where it becomes weird, because I wouldn't say Fremen is an exceptionally complicated faction.
Yeah.
But what they are is a faction that kind of just hands you a loaded gun and says, okay, just watch out where you point that thing. Because a lot of factions in Dune have the ability to just completely screw yourself over and be like, all right, well, in 90 minutes, you're going to have a real good shot of winning again, but not so much in the meantime. And I think Fremen is probably on the top of that list.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that they don't need spice for shipping, and they don't need it for combat. They just really need it for treachery cards. I mean, there are other uses, bribes and deals. It's good to have spice. It's good to have spice so that you can help out an ally if you're in an alliance. But removing those necessities, and then their 3 force revival limit also kind of pushes them towards this is the sort of thing that you want a beginner to have at their disposal, because they're going to make some foolish mistakes, getting into fights that they shouldn't get into, or over dialing because they just don't really know what's a safe number to dial or how conservative they can get away with. And so it's a little more forgiving. The fact that they can just bring forces onto roughly half of the board for free, so they can get to a lot of spice blows pretty easily. With their movement, their extra movement, they can reach a lot of the rest of the board. So they're very flexible, which is nice for a new player. They don't have as many limitations. Although, like even their shipping thing, where it's unlimited in one way, it's very limited in another way. And again, a new player won't pick up on that immediately. But again, I think that for me, it's still, they fall in the middle. I'd be curious to hear, more of Gary's reasoning for putting them into the advanced. This is another faction where, like if you're relatively new to Dune and you're playing the Fremen, I don't see you winning a lot of games as the Fremen. But an experienced player can kick a lot of ass with Fremen. So like our friend Banana Smasher, I think Fremen
he claims they're the strongest faction in the game.
Absolutely. And I've seen him win a lot of games as the Fremen, and he smugly says, told you, and then and then logs off. So it's the sort of thing. But again, I think that is another argument for why they're not a beginner one, because I think he is an experienced player. Anybody with their custom wooden Dune board is clearly signaling that they know what they're talking about. So yeah, I mean, I think where would they fall within the range of if this were like an actual timeline, or not a timeline, but whatever, like extra intermediate or super beginner. I don't know, maybe somewhere in there. But I think for me, it's got to be an intermediate. And
That's where
uh,
I side as well. And it's funny because I have exactly one reason why they should be intermediate, and it's because there's five good reasons they should be advanced and five good reasons they should be beginner.
yeah, I think
Otherwise, they're not. There's nothing really intermediate about them. It's just that they're so
yeah,
polarizing in terms of why you'd put them on each end.
that's just science
Because
right there. You can't fight that.
yeah, there's a lot of simple things that they avoid, like paying for shipment and paying for dialing, but at the same time, you need to every turn use those tools to advance your game because Fremen they can very easily fall behind. You've got tools in front of you, but if you don't know how to use them, you're gonna get screwed over.
Yeah. So, and I think if we average it all out, like Captain Cold's beginner, Gary is advanced, but the rest of us say intermediate. That's where we're going to put them, and we'll see how they go. All right, who's next?
Hmm. I say let's stick Atrades in there. I think maybe do all the OG factions first. It seems as good an
Yeah.
idea as any.
So there was a long time where I was recommending Atrades to relatively new players, and I said, and for
Hmm.
me the reasoning was um, their bidding advantage. That was the big thing, and of course the battle prescience too. It does make fighting those battles a little bit easier to make decisions about what should I do. But like it's like knowing what everybody has. Less about keeping track of it, but knowing, all right, this is a good card up for bid, so yeah, I should bid on that, or this is not a very good card, I'm going to pass on it. Just somebody having access to that bit of knowledge, I think, makes playing a couple of the important parts of the game a little bit easier. But I think that there's so many nuances with that, and there's the game within the game of trying to get other people to bid a lot on terrible cards, and when you should share knowledge for spice or other favors, how to really, like most new players, when they're using the prescience, it's just about the weapons and the defenses. But when you get to the point where you're asking about the dial,
That's when you should be
yeah,
afraid.
that
When the
exactly.
Atreides is asking your dial.
Then people are very nervous about that. They hate that question. And like, oh, now I have
Wait,
to
don't
really
you have
think
anything
about
better to
this.
ask?
So I think that, in order to really make Atrades sing, you want to have some level of knowledge of certainly of Dune specifically, but any of the other types of games that Dune certainly has inspired since then. So I mean, for me, it would kind of fall in between. So if we check in, let's just check in with
Interesting.
Gary. Gary puts Atreides as a beginner one.
Oof.
Boy, our dummy puts Atreides as an advanced one,
Oh God.
and Captain Cold also beginner. So
Interesting.
it's weighted a little bit more on the beginner side than on the advanced side. But if this is for me another intermediate faction. But tell us, Jaded, what are your thoughts?
I find that weird because I would actually stick them on advanced. I think it's all the knowledge and information that they have is why you shouldn't have a beginner playing them because I already playing Dune, you're going to be overwhelmed, and it's kind of just going to be the person who read the rules pulling you through the experience. And when you've got all the information that Atreides has, not to mention recording it accurately, but being able to process it, I think that's going to be a source of a lot of analysis paralysis. I say stick them in advanced. Do not play Atreides your first game unless you've got five other newbies at the table. Just because, like, yeah, you've got all the information, but how do you know how to use it? And I think when it's your first time playing Dune, you're not going to want to make any mistakes. Like, you will be the reason why the game takes 6 hours if you're playing Atreides, and unless you're just saying, ah, screw it, I'll just do this and see what happens. A lot of information to consider, a lot of times where you have to consider that, during bidding, during shipping, who are you going to attack? Are you going to leave only five forces there? And then during battles, if you are in any, what are you going to play? What are you going to ask? I think it's just it's going to be a lot of overload.
Yeah, it certainly could be. I think most of these factions are going to have that as a hashtag overload quality to them. There are, I mean, this is one of the factions that, I mean, technically it has four advantages. You've got the spice card, seeing that, which a
The
lot of
movement
people forget to
advantage.
even do. But it's another element of you are privy to knowledge that other players are not, which could be useful. Understanding that if this card that you look at is Shai Hulud, that's going to have repercussions in the following round, and how should that inform what you do? And that's certainly at the minimum an intermediate element. And then they got the Kwisatz Haderach, which they don't even start the game with. They have to unlock it. Now, there's some people are like, great, I'm going to go get into this fight and dial 7 right away. And there's pros and cons for that. I know some experienced players are like, that's first thing I'm going to do is
Get
unlock
7 people
that, get that
killed.
ready to go, because I've got the 2 free revival. I can get those guys back in a couple of rounds. But on the plus side is now you've got a way to protect yourself from traders with a nice little +2, as long as you're not getting into too many battles each round. That's a pretty formidable element, which even a beginning player can appreciate and take advantage of. But let's put Atrades here sort of in between intermediate and advanced, since that's sort of where we ended up. I was going to put them in here, but there's definitely plenty of good reason to consider them an advanced faction. And now we come to the faction that I tend to play the most, just because of the 30 years before the expansions. This was my go-to. Now, this is what Gary would consider an intermediate faction. Boyar Dummy has it as a beginner one. And Captain Cold has it as a beginner one. And I also have it as a beginner one. And the reason for me is that you don't have to worry about making a decision on your traders. You just get them all. How you take advantage of that, there's certainly some nuance to that. Should you call a trader early, the first opportunity you get it, or is there the long con by letting somebody think that so-and-so is safe against you? But it's nice to get free cards when you buy a card. So you never really feel like you've paid too much for a card, because you're going to get another one. And as long as you didn't buy 2 worthless cards, which can happen, you still feel like you're doing all right. Again, there's they only have the 3 advantages, and one of them, again, is kind of a no-brainer. But yeah, I think I mentioned, so Gary has it as intermediate, Boyar Dummy as basic or beginner, Captain Cold as a beginner as well. I have it as a beginner. What does Jaded think
Hey,
about
I'm gonna
Harkonnen?
throw my hat in the beginner pile as well. It's it's a good faction, and the abilities are just more of what you would already have. The Trader mechanic is pretty simple to understand. Well, there you go. You got more of them. Treachery cards important to the game. Just here you go. Twice as many as normal. Boom. Simple enough. And the other thing that does is, like in Dune, when you start to lose your position and you kind of enter that death spiral where you're just relying off Chome and not really doing too much, the hardest thing to get back, other than your leaders, is your treachery cards. Because, you got to be able to win bids to get them. And if you're able to buy a card for only 2 or 3 spice, it's probably just worthless. As Harkonnen, though, you're getting 2 every time you win a bid. It means you're going to have way more than everyone else. And if you do lose a few critical battles, you'll probably still have some cards left over, so that when you've got more spice and you get your forces all revived again, you don't have to worry about winning bids on cards. You've already got them probably. So I think that's when they're down on the luck, no cards, no spice, they're one of the weakest factions in the game. But I think it's harder for them to fall that far down the ladder. So I'd say they work decently as a beginner
Yeah,
faction,
even
as well as their abilities are pretty simple.
yeah. I think even when Harkonnen is in the hands of a beginner, experienced players are often not keen to tangle with them, especially early in the game. There's just too many unknowns. They don't know. Even Atrades doesn't know half of
Most of
the
your cards,
Harkonnen's
yeah.
cards exactly, and Nobody knows anything about their traders, and everyone's a little bit leery of the capture leader advantage. So if you get into a battle with the Harkonnen, and Harkonnen is gunning for you early in the game, you feel like, oh, they got a couple of my leaders as a trader, so this doesn't look good for me. They probably have my weakest guy and my strongest guy. So and then you're hedging your own bets by playing a relatively low leader. Although you might as well just choose your leaders at random because that's how their traders were chosen. And so, yeah, I mean, with just about any of these factions, if you make some critical mistakes, you're in trouble. Whether you're a beginner or even an advanced player, will run into those. And a more experienced player will be able to wring more out of Harkonnen. They'll be able to make deals just by threatening with things and get spice that way, or avoid battles when they don't want them. So, but yeah, even a new player can cause plenty of trouble as the Harkonnen. So I think that they would probably make sense as a
I agree with
leader.
that. They have a big stick by default. You don't have to make smart moves as Harkonnen to be intimidating and tempt people to just let you have your way.
All right, we've got two left here. Now the
The
Spacing
two
Guild.
advanced.
Yeah, Spacing Guild. So it's interesting because, in the rules, even going back to 1979, when you were playing with fewer than 6 players, Spacing Guild and Bene Gesserit are the two factions that the designers suggested you don't use until you've got, if you've got 5 players, add in the guild, and if you have 6 players, add in the Bene Gesserit. Now let's see here. Spacing Guild, Gary considers a beginner faction.
Hmm.
Boyar Dummy considers them a beginner faction. Captain Cold considers them a beginner faction.
Ooh, okay.
I also put them on there. I was a little bit reluctant because I think there's going to be, and maybe you'll make those arguments for why they're higher than beginner, but I will start with, and again, like the Emperor, they're going to have a lot of spice, and spice makes a lot of things possible in the game. So if you're a beginning player, you at least have some options. If you've got spice, okay, I can ship if I need to, or I can buy those cards, or I can revive more forces, whatnot. And if you're playing with the advanced rules, you've got the ability to say, yeah, I want to go, I want to see what everyone else is doing before I make my decision, which is, I think, a good thing for a new player to be able to do. They don't have a lot else that they're doing. They have different ways that they can ship, which is fine. You're hardly anyone ships back to their reserves. Cross shipping can be a big deal, but I think even a new player can see, well, I've got all these forces here, and not many of my reserves, and I need to put a lot of them. I need to get from Tuix to there. Well, I can do that, and no one else can do that. So. That's pretty easy to grok right there. The stall out victory condition, there's definitely ways to make that more likely for you to happen as the guild. But even a new player can again get behind the idea of just don't let anybody win until the game is over, and then you win. So those are all reasons why I think everybody can kind of understand that, and your constant influx of spice lets you deal with your mistakes. It's a more forgiving because of that. There's plenty of nuance to really make guild, because there a lot of ways they're not considered a strong faction amongst strong players, because there's ways to kind of foil them. They don't have super impressive leaders. And a lot of players are just, they're playing the spoiler rather than trying to go for the earlier wins. So, a more experienced player is going to get more out of the guild, but that's going to be true of just about anything. So that's why I kind of agree with the other playtesters on that. What does Jaded say?
Hmm. It looks like I'm gonna have my work cut out for me.
Yeah, make it.
I think at a table full of all new players, I think they function fine as a beginner faction. But I think once you start being like the only new person at the table and you've got a bunch of other experienced players, I think it ticks up more towards advanced because the guild sort of plays this expected role as, warden of the game. If anybody's gonna go for a win, it's assumed that the guild is gonna stop it, or that they at least have to say, "No, I'm not stopping it. You have to help, or you have to pay me off," just because of that stall out win. And I think for a new player, that's a difficult role to fill. Like as an example, I played my second ever game of Dune. I played the guild, and it ended on the second turn because there was a win to be stopped that only I could do it, and I didn't realize it. So it just ends, and that's kind of when you have that experienced group of players, that's just what's going to happen. So that's why I would say maybe don't play guild at a as a new player, especially if you're advanced and you have that take your turn when you wish. You know, it's a bit of a when do I use it? How do I use it? Even though it usually just ends up being I take my turn last all the time, which can be good for a new player because they will never get cornered into a having to ship first and then get screwed over like that.
Yeah.
So I think maybe I balance out somewhere in intermediate.
Yeah, we can put that right there. So we do have a couple more people have joined us. We do have Captain Cold in the flesh, and we have Mr. Nobody. So we're in Tabletop Simulator as well to as a visual aid, and we're 5 factions in with our discussion. But yes, just to sort of recap, we've agreed that the Emperor and the Harkonnen are our beginner factions. Jaded and I, anyway, have agreed to put Fremen as an intermediate faction. But we have some disagreement on Atrades, so we're sort of halfway between intermediate and advanced. And we just talked about the Spacing Guild, where we settled on halfway between beginner and intermediate. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, I would definitely, I would put spacing quite high myself, actually, because I've seen that the easy aspect is very easy to get a lot of money, so the economy is very easy to manage. But I think balancing when you're going to try to go for cross shipping and like trying to track where you think Karamas are. I mean, the easy aspect too is they have a potentially easy alternate win condition. If they can get the game to go near the end of the game, it becomes fairly easy the last round.
Yeah, I had a spreadsheet here when we were discussing it in our Discord earlier this month, and you had Spacing Guild as a beginner faction, Captain Cold. So just to, but that now that you've reevaluated it, we'll shove it a little bit. We'll nudge it a little bit more into the intermediate. But we're going to go on because we've got 7 more factions here. We're going to cap off our final base game faction with the Bene Gesserit. Now, as I mentioned, even the original designers, when they said, if you don't have 6 players, leave out Bene Gesserit. And I think there's a good reason for it. But as we recap, Gary had Bene Gesserit as a beginner faction.
You're kidding.
Boyar Dummy has it as an advanced faction. Captain Cole put it into intermediate in our earlier discussion. And I, too, dropped it into intermediate. I know there's plenty of good reason to nudge it into advanced, but here's my elevator pitch for why I would go on here. First of all, you got five strength leaders, which I think is... there's reasons why you want to have a low strength leader for throne battles, but throne battles, beginners don't do that. So they just care about I've got strong leaders and they're all 5s, which also makes it hard for people to go, who's the best choice for a trader? None of them are the best choice. And so there's that. The voice, I think, is arguably the strongest faction advantage in the game, and putting that in the hands of even a novice player, they can understand, I've got a shield, so if I just say don't play a poison weapon, I'm good to go here, right? And or conversely, I've got a poison weapon, and so if I say no snooper, don't play a poison defense, I should be able to kill your leader here pretty effectively. There's plenty of nuance with advisors, like, all right, do I flip? When do I become a fighter? And we are talking about, all right, it's a beginner player, but we're using advanced rules. So I think that's how you have to really calculate this. So just so everybody is on the same page. So we're using advanced rules. We're using all those extra advantages. Like Fremen, the Bene Gesserit have got quite a bit going on. They fill up both sides of that faction sheet. So it's a lot to keep track of. A lot of it is just like, all right, what about advisors in this situation or that situation? But there's plenty going on. Prediction is much more of a crapshoot with the beginning player. They don't know. They'll just be like, who do I think is the best player? I'm going to pick their faction, and let's go with round 5 because it's halfway through the game. And so there's a little bit less. That's why they can't be a beginning faction, is just because if you want to get most out of the prediction, you don't treat it as a prediction. You treat it as a goal, and you are maneuvering to make that goal happen. But even advanced players have a hard time pulling that off. So there's plenty of reasons to say, yeah, this could be advanced, but I don't feel bad about having a player who knows Dune, has played it a few times, to say, yeah, I think you're ready for the BG now, and you can probably do pretty well with it. You're going to be a very desirable ally when the Nexus occurs, because everybody wants to get their hands on voice. You've got strong leaders. And so, yeah, that's my thing. But I'll turn it over to Jaded, because he's the big mystery currently. What do you say?
I mean, I'm going to stick him on the advanced side.
Yeah.
I think on paper, as somebody who knows the game, it's like, oh, yeah, they're great for a new player, They can flip, so like they can't be put into tough battles. They've got a really strong combat ability. People always want to ally them. But I think you've got to, try to step back and look at it as a new player coming into the game. Any one of these abilities is something that would like require your full attention to know how to use well. And they have like 3 abilities on this same level of complexity, like the prediction, that seems to me like a write-off for new players. You just don't have the experience to know how to manipulate it to come true. The voice, it's a good ability, but you have to kind of be familiar with the way battles go. Like, even the battle phase is a tough thing for new players. You see them over dial really high or under dial really high. And once you get a feel for it, the voice is great and you can use it very easily. But as a new player, where it's just one extra thing you have to consider, I think it could be tough. And again, just lots of abilities, lots of stuff you have to read. I put them in advanced, no way in beginner.
I think I mostly agree with you. I think I did rate them an intermediate before, just because they have the easiest thing that if you get a weapon, you can very clearly say, hey, you can go around and tell everyone not to use the appropriate defense, and the weapon is now stronger, and you're getting good use of one of your abilities. But the voice can be stronger than that for a more experienced player, especially if they're paying more attention and trying to gain more card knowledge and starting to realize that, hey, well, this player, I've seen 2 of their cards so far. I know both of them are poison weapons, so I only have to worry about this additional 3rd card, or maybe they only have 2 cards in their hand. And now you can voice them even more precisely. And other players can play around it where they know going into the battle what the ideal voice would be. But even sort of planning for that and what you think the other person might have, getting the most value out of it is not completely automatic. I think it's probably the easiest ability to use out of the base factions here, but the other Bene Gesserit abilities, getting value out of them is not very straightforward, especially the advisors. I could see generally being wasted and not being much of an advantage for a beginner player. I'd put them above Atrades, but I think I'd probably move Atrades down a bit from where they are right now, just because I think it's a little bit more straightforward with them, that you want to gather all the card info and just play the perfect cards versus everyone, and that's your main benefit, is that you're going to get the cards correct in every battle.
I think if we were just dealing with these 6 factions, that my recommendation to the publisher would be 2 beginner, 2 intermediate, 2 advanced. Just because I think
Why not Fremen in advanced?
I think that Fremen have the reason that they're not a beginner faction is just because they have so many advantages. They got more advantages, but all of their advantages are pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of mystery and nuance. Not to say that there's none, but the storm. I get to see the storm. I mean, there's how do you leverage that? You can definitely get more mileage out of it the more you know about the game, but it's very easy to understand. You've got 3 double strength forces. You don't need spice for much of anything other than treachery cards. So it's mostly just keeping track of what you can do and when that makes it an intermediate in my mind. I don't think that it's that advanced other than just trying to stay on top of and get the most out of it. And I think if I would want to have the symmetry of 2 of each flavor rather than saying, yeah, this game is at 4 advanced factions and 2 beginner and nothing is intermediate. So I think this is how this would be my recommendations. But that said, there are more than 6 factions now. And again, I would want to try to maintain some level of balance. I wouldn't shoehorn in like, well, these now all would be considered advanced because we have so many more beginner, which obviously is not the case. But, likewise, I wouldn't downgrade these to beginner just because we have so many more advanced factions. But I think that looking for relative balance is a factor that should be considered. How much weight it gets, I think, is worth the debate. And if ever a system like this does get implemented, I think there's a lot that would need to go into explaining how we determined how things fell into those different categories. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was just, this struck me as an interesting visual here when we started with just the basic 6 factions. And again, I'll point out that this is the one, if they're playing 5 players, the designers say, leave this one out. It would be interesting to get see what, drove them to do it. Is it because of the advanced nature of the faction, or did it have something to do with the dynamic? Like, if you're going to have only 5 factions, this dynamic here makes more sense than one that includes the Bene Gesserit. When you get down to 4 players, the Spacing Guild is the next faction that they suggest bumping out. And it's not explicitly stated, but I know from talking with them that those suggestions were based on experience level, generally speaking. Like, if you're a super advanced player, they say use whatever mix you want. It doesn't matter. Even if you're playing a 3-player game, you can be like, yeah, we're going to use Spacing Guild and Bene Gesserit and the Emperor. And any of those players has, I think, a decent chance of winning the game depending on how things go. And so suggesting a faction not be included, I think there was a major factor of, if you've got newer players, this is why we want you to leave them out. So they probably would have rated BG as more on the advanced side, and they probably would not have considered Guild to be a beginner. Although, again, one of their most advanced factors, the take your turn when you want, was introduced by Avalon Hill, not by them. So who knows? Who knows what was really driving these decisions? Maybe they just didn't like Guild as much as they liked all the other ones. So that may have been the factor itself. But I think that I think
the thing with spacing is that a beginner is always either not using cross shipping at all, or they're putting all 20 people into Ixian and then trying to cross ship and getting Karama 100% of the time. Not realizing that putting that many means that someone's going to save a Karama for that.
Yeah, I mean, every faction has its hard lessons that you will learn, and never forget once you have been you've cornered in that way, putting too many eggs into one basket.
I think for me, I think I got to go with Jaden on this one, because I originally probably would have put them on the advanced side of intermediate, but they sort of advance in complexity with like the extra expansions and the different like modules. Like once you start adding like the extra 15 card treachery deck, once you start adding in Richess, once you start adding in homeworlds and leader skills and things like that, I feel like they're very nuanced, and they have two abilities that are pretty obvious. It's like they get the free Chome income, so they don't really have to think much about that. They just get 2 free spice no matter what. The voice, I feel like there are some interesting decisions to make there. There are obviously some times where it's pretty obvious what you want to voice as the BG. But then it's like, Captain was saying earlier, it's like you got to make decisions about, do you want to send advisors or spiritual advisors, right? And there's some strategies behind why you would want to do one over the other. Maybe there's a spice flow next to the sink. But if you're thinking about a couple turns ahead, it's like, well, hey, I've already got, 4 advisors in this, in like Cabana. If somebody else ships there, I can get 5, and then I can flip, and then maybe I can get that territory. You are already an attractive ally because the voice is super powerful, but now you have an actual like foothold on the planet. Or you could send them to the sink, and you're like, well, I could actually just like walk out here, and go get some spice, which will, jumpstart my economy. And if I send 3 or 4, fighters over there, I mean, you could come fight me, but if I've collected any amount of cards, it's a little more challenging whether or not you're going to beat me. So I feel like they have a lot of interesting decision points, and I feel like it's little things that add up to be a lot. And the prediction is like, it's very hard to get right, but when you do, it's like one of the coolest rules like ever in board games. Like it's so awesome when it comes to fruition. So yeah, I think I'm with Jaden on this one. I think I would probably lean more for them in the advanced bucket rather than the intermediate one. But I would not be tone deaf to somebody who said, yeah, I feel like they're more intermediate than they are advanced.
A little fun fact is that I'll share with you is that I've taught Dune to completely new groups on many occasions, and normally what I do is I break down and even like saying let's dive into advanced. So and I like to keep that as the main driver here. But I break down what all the factions do, and then I just say, who do you want to play? And I'll play whichever one is left over. And I think, with very few exceptions, the faction that I end up having to play is the Fremen. And everybody is like, yeah, I want these advantages. I want to do these things. I want to have these capabilities. And I think that I end up with the Fremen for 2 reasons. I think one, as I mentioned, is that they've got the most advantages. So I think there's just like a lot to keep track of. And I think the other reason is that they don't have anything that's super flashy. They just, you're like, I've got some double strength soldiers, but I only have 3 of them. And they're like, our Emperor has 5. And so they just don't seem as good of a faction to newer players as these others. They have much more obvious things that they can do that are exciting. And, Fremen has a ton of not super exciting things that they can do. But it's realizing how they mesh well together and how you can surprise players with certain things that makes Fremen a formidable faction. But that's just been an interesting observation that I've made after many years of teaching people how to play Dune.
I think that's where I'd actually switch them with Atrades if we're doing 2, 2, and 2, and put them in the advanced and Atrades in the intermediate. Because I think as a beginner, the Atrades is hard because you have so much information that you'd have to keep track of, and then you're like, confused. But then as intermediate, though, would be like, okay, like 2 stars difficulty. Okay, once I start tracking all the info and I'm aware of what everyone has bought from the card row, I'm using the battle prescience in a effective way. Those two things together, suddenly Atrades becomes very powerful. And I think that a lot of intermediate players can play them as like a very, very strong faction pretty easily. It's not too hard to figure out like what they should be doing to get the most out of their powers. But Fremen, again, has nothing flashy, and like seeing the storm doesn't sound that exciting, but in the hands of an advanced player can be a very powerful advantage because they're potentially either going into strongholds that are about to be under storm and fighting with the intention of leaving one guy behind and then reviving for strength to then be able to go for a win the following turn. They're also potentially being more aggressive going after a Carthag or Arakeen that's about to be hit by storm while the shield wall is destroyed, because they can leave 2 behind and one will die to the storm, but the other one gets a free stronghold. And then also just positioning, because they lose half to the storm and they have to be very cautious about that. Like while it's an advantage, it can also be a disadvantage if they don't consider the storm movement effectively and they're leaving potentially small stacks around. Like it's very easy for a beginner or intermediate Fremen player to just be wiped out and just be like, hey, this is the most garbage faction ever. Like they can't do anything. Their shipment and movement alone is, again, both a advantage and disadvantage. It is crippling that they cannot ship to Arakeen and move to Carthag, or ship to Carthag and move to Arakeen like any other faction can. Their only ability to hit 2 strongholds at once without Hazure is to already hold Carthag and then ship into Tabor and then move over to Carthag. I mean, unless they're allied with Spacing Guild. But I mean, they're going to want to ally with any other factions they can too. So like moving around that advantage/disadvantage with the free shipping and having it limited where it goes is, I think, very hard on its own. Getting advantage out of the storm, losing half plus knowing where it goes. Like these are things that just seem like passives, I think, as a beginner or intermediate, and not real advantages. And so I think like without like, I'd put them as like totally a 3, because like I think only advanced players are even a real threat when they're playing Fremen. That usually like it's, you know, someone that's only played a few times, they're just going to be like easily stopped. Everyone's going around killing their leaders, sometimes called like a pinata faction. Even their setup, it's important where they go, and they have to have some sort of plan about how they split their initial forces and what they're doing on the first turn. Otherwise, they're going to start to get beat up right away.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an interesting distinction between subtle, but still there is how easy is it to play this faction? How easy is it to win with this faction? And even further, you know, how well can you pull off a win solo versus with an ally? And how much are you depending on that ally to make things happen for you, especially as a new player? We talked about that earlier. Jade and I were talking about, you know, Emperor is easy to play as a beginner. That doesn't mean that it's easy for you to win as Emperor if you don't know what you're really doing and don't understand a lot of the nuances to Dune. But
well,
yeah,
I think a beginner is going to struggle to win with any faction. But at the same time, like I would rate it maybe based on how easily can you get the full advantages out of their powers.
Sure.
Like I think Bene Gesserit advanced here makes sense, even though voice is easy to get the full advantage out of that. Like the rest of their sheet, other than the 2 Chome, like I think is very advanced. Like especially the advisors.
Yeah. And again, I'd love to have gotten Gary's reasoning for why he considers them a beginner faction.
I know exactly why.
Oh yeah, do tell.
I know exactly why. It's because of the voice, and he's very, very, very adamant that the voice is like the easiest, most obvious thing to use. You can either use it to guarantee that your leader doesn't die and they have to like try to crazy outdial you, or you can just kill their leader if you outnumber them, and you're pretty much going to win the fight unless you run into a traitor. Like, because I've talked to him about this many times, and he's like, you get free income, you get free shipping on the planet. He's like, it's a no-brainer. And spoiler alert, they're also like his most despised faction ever. So I think some of it may go hand in hand.
Yeah. All right.
That's
Let's.
what I was going to guess he would say as well. I think the only argument I'd have against that with the voice is that you can also bluff with it. That it does have some strength in saying, like, do not play a projectile defense while you have no weapon, just to get the other person to play a lower leader.
Oh yeah, and
No,
and once
absolutely.
you have figured out how to employ positive voice, that's when everyone knows that you've arrived as a player and you are to be feared. All right, let's dive into the expansion factions. So again, we've started off by doing a quick review of what some of the other players. So we'll start with Gary and Boyardumi. They both have Tleilaxu as an intermediate faction. I've put it more as a beginner faction, and so I'll start again with my reasoning here. It's it's with a lot of the economy factions. I feel it's the same common denominator. If you've got spice, you have a lot more options, which as a newer player, you're gonna want access to that, because when you don't have spice, you really have to get creative with what you're going to do to stay in the game. The face dancer mechanism is again, it's pretty straightforward. It's a fairly passive advantage, so you're just paying attention to the battles. A more experienced player will again understand, like, is there advantage to me in revealing a face dancer right now? If it's just like, I'm going to have one force here in Habanya flat, or even in a stronghold, like I've got a one force in Siege Tabor, and I'm not allied. There's just really no advantage to me to call a face dancer for that. I'm not really getting much out of that, especially if it's not preventing a win or anything of significance. So, like with any of the factions, there's going to be nuances that a more experienced player will get more out of it, but it's very straightforward, I think, for a new player to understand what their capabilities are and to start to get a sense of what can I do with it. Like, okay, I can afford to get Stilgar out of the tanks, and I'm down a leader. Why wouldn't I spend the spice to get him? And now I've got Stilgar. And if he was a face dancer, now I know that Stilgar is untraderable as a leader. So that's a bonus. So even new players can understand that. But I think the nuances of how to really get more out of it would push it into intermediate. But again, I think that's true of any of the beginner factions, is that in the hands of an experienced player, you're going to be more effective with it. But I've seen newbies play Tleilaxu fine. They weren't making any horrendous mistakes. They got a good revival rate, and that income, I think, is worthwhile. What do you guys make your
I'd
case?
argue that they're the most beginner. Like, if you're playing for the very first time with a table of 5 experienced players, this is your best chance to win in the first game. And their abilities are straightforward of how to get a lot out of it. I'd say beginner.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're a good beginner faction because there's a 0% chance of them winning the game, but there's also a 0% chance of them having one of those bad games where they're really poor and they can't do anything, because like that's literally an impossible state for BT. They will eventually start getting those tanks full and get that income going, and they don't have those normal barriers that most players have, like having too many forces in the tanks, or no leaders, and you can't revive any of them yet. But I don't think they're really
Yeah,
strong enough, especially for a new player, to win a game.
The only thing that I
I
think
would
is a bit
say.
difficult for beginner. Oh, sorry. As I was just going to say, the picking the price for leader revivals, because if they make them too cheap, they can make it easy for someone else to win.
Yeah, Jack, Jaded, I do not disagree with the rating that you gave them. I think I personally would probably put them on the ultra mega beginner friendly side of intermediate. And the only reason why I say that is because of the 4 econ factions, I feel like they get the most and are almost like incentivized to make deals and bribes, specifically with like revival limits, reviving leaders, protection from face dancers, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of like kind of machinations to the way that they can kind of play, but they're also like incredibly forgiving. So it's like you kind of like, let's say that you have a Mala pistol and you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna like beam 6 guys down and I'm just gonna go try to fight the Emperor over here. Oh look, I lost Zol. It's like it doesn't matter because you can always get him back out of the tanks. And the guys that you lost, 2 of them you get back for free. You automatically get a spice for that. So it's like you're incentivized to get down and start a ruckus. And they can be played fun, like really, really, really fun. Jada's got some interesting strategies with them that he uses whenever we play games. And yeah, no, I for me personally, like I said, I would probably put them maybe on the higher side of beginner, maybe like the super ultra low side of intermediate. But yeah, no, I totally agree. I definitely think they're very forgiving, and you can make some mistakes with them, and you're not totally out of the game.
I think the only thing I disagree with you on is the deals thing, because I think their sheet encourages deals a little bit more than other factions. So I think for a beginner, it's actually easier to jump into like what kind of interesting deals you can make as them, or I think easier to see versus like spacing can do a lot of the same stuff. The only thing is spacing can't necessarily help as much a player that's in trouble. Like if they want to fund somebody else, like stopping a win, and that person doesn't have the 10 spice to give them, so they can do a free shipping deal, then they can't say, hey, I'll give you free shipping. Because the only way spacing can do it is to take the 10 spice and then say, I'll bribe it back to you. But as Tleilaxu, you can say, hey, like, I want you to stop this win. Here's, Chani and Stilgar. You get them for free so long as you use them this turn. And maybe a beginner might miss the opportunity for that. But I feel like being able to pick the price, it's very clear for them to see, hey, I can jump in and make some cool deals here right away. And that earlier spacing players, for example, won't go into like really doing any deals about shipping.
Well, I think I think maybe you misunderstood what I was saying. I'm saying that of the 4 econ factions, they are incentivized the most to make deals. Like they are incentivized to do the most table talking and to try to figure out sort of the needs and the wants of, if Fremen and Harkonnen get into a bad battle and the Harkonnen completely wipe them out, they might be incentivized to be like, hey, look, I don't have that much spice, but I see they killed Othium. I'll let you get Othium back, and I'll up your revival limits. But I'm gonna go here, so I just need you to come over here and block for me, or something like that, right? And just try to get them to like spend the spice that they do on getting their leaders and their warriors out, rather than like trying to feed the Emperor, money to get cards. And I do agree with you on that. Yeah, no, I do think that it does incentivize, players to start talking. And even if you have a beginner player playing Tleilaxu who doesn't want to talk, the other players may start being like, hey, so can I get Fade back, since he was a dirty trader? And it's like, oh, you want Fade back, huh? Well, what do you give me for him, right? And then that starts like interesting conversations where you're right. Like, I mean, unless you're subbing back shipping, or subbing back spice for cards bought, or you're trying to pay somebody off to go attack somebody else, it's like the Tleilaxu have a direct relationship with like the bad outcomes of losing factions via the forces and the leaders that they have in the tanks. And so I think it's a cool their interaction with the table is very cool, and I do appreciate that it lends even those new players that kind of table talk.
Yeah, I think along that, the reason that I like them as a beginner faction is that I feel like they have a naturally built-in play style that aligns with how a new player would typically engage with the game. They don't really get their income going until a few rounds have gone in. They don't start with much spice, so there's not a whole lot they can do. and if they do, like, all right, recklessly get into some battles or whatever, the leader gets killed or they lose some forces, it's actually good for them. It's driving up their income. It's making space for Golas. So they get the benefit of having a few rounds of the game proceed before they can really start to do things. And then they start to understand, oh, you know what? I can afford to do this now. Or I noticed that, you've got 2 leaders in the tanks and they don't match the one face dancer I have for you. So I'm not going to revive those leaders for you, but I'll revive these other leaders for this guy who's got the spice for it. And the game kind of teaches them how to get more out of their faction. And it really doesn't, they're not like, as Jaded said earlier, they're not like a kid who's been handed a gun and said, go out and play. And so they're not super dangerous right away, even if they do reveal a face dancer. I mean, the odds of them doing the 3 face dancers round 1 and just winning the game is astronomical. And if it does happen, it's like, wow, good for you. You won your first game of Dune and you didn't have to do anything. But they are going to see like, oh, okay, yeah, I've seen some leaders get into battles, and I've noticed that these 1 and 2 strength leaders are not winning any battles, and those are 2 of my face dancers. So yeah, that's who I'm going to shuffle out at the Mentat pause. And then, when a good leader is dead and they've got space for it. So yeah, it just kind of helps them along, I feel like, more so than the other factions, just do organically.
Yeah, they have the least early decisions. I think in many ways they're like kind of the anti-Fremen there, where like the Fremen have to pick their setup. They have to manage their movement very well the first few turns. They don't end up with loose stacks. And so they're able to get a decent amount of spice and get presence on the board. Tleilaxu isn't doing a whole lot the first couple turns. The beginning of the game, they don't even have to pick what trader they want. The traders are kind of just picked for them as the game goes, and they're shuffling back in the Tleilaxus and the dead leaders. So I think like they don't have any difficult early decisions at all. They're incentivized to jump in there and start doing deals, based on the mechanics.
All right,
I'd consider them the lowest beginner.
All right,
that's fair.
Let's go with their counterparts here, which this is a faction that Gary would consider advanced, as well as Boyar Dummy. I put them more in the intermediate, but I mean I can see the case for that. They've got the hidden mobile stronghold, which on the surface seems like very straightforward. You put it somewhere where nobody can get to it, and then if you see spice, you go for it. But I think we all know that there's a little bit more to it. There's a level of risk reward with where you deploy it. The use of suboids and cyborgs, again, also it seems fairly straightforward. All right, these guys are half strength, these guys are double strength. But getting real understanding of how you leverage those guys is why they're definitely not a beginner faction. Just knowing that, like, all right, I'm dialing my cyborgs, but if I win that battle, I'm actually not going to lose any of those cyborgs if I've smartly have that many suboids that I can send off, because they're also cheaper to revive to begin with. So understanding that cycle, knowing like, all right, I need to kind of always keep them together. How do I take advantage of they've got 2 movement and the leveraging of their bidding advantage is another thing. It's definitely related to the card knowledge that Atrades get, but it's a very different perspective on that card knowledge. And again, it's enough that just like with the Atrades, pulls them more and more towards the advanced. But let's hear from the panel. Where do you drop them at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that wherever you put Atrades, they have to be a bit higher, just because like Atrades, the knowledge advantage is not too difficult, I think, for most players to figure out how to get a lot of value out of it. But the Ixian one, although potentially you're getting more information, but you're technically not allowed to take notes. So people don't take notes, and you have more information to manage, and a lot of that information is not 100% precise. You just know that Harkonnen, bought a card that could have been a poison weapon, and you probably manipulated the row so that there was a higher percentage of poison weapons. You probably teched a card off, but even then, you're not 100% sure if they have it or not. You have to remember that, though, because that now you still want to use the snooper versus them because they might have a poison. And you also need to try to get value out of the top deck and bottom deck. And, it's especially valuable if Harkonnen is in because then you can know potentially most of their hand, whereas Atrades will not. But I think a lot of earlier players are just going to, like the first couple times you play them, are just going to always bottom deck. And you may not get as much value out of just always bottom decking every single time. The other aspect, I think, is the HMS, that knowing where the ideal places are to position that so that it's ready to potentially to get spice, but also to hold on to it as long as possible. And there's certain factions that ally with them potentially become very strong. I think particularly like Atrades and Space and Guild are like really good allies, but they can also, depending on the game setup, find like a really ideal ally and can potentially be very, very strong as an ally if they're holding on to that stronghold for a long time or most of the game.
Yeah, I'm going to say Ix is an advance purely on the fact that to play them well, or even to play them half decent, you need to be more familiar with the treachery deck as a whole than as Atrades. Atrades can always take notes, but Ixians, they need to know what all the cards are and know that there's 4 poison weapons, projectile weapons, defenses, etc. Because they have to just remember that stuff. And some people have a mind palace or whatever. Some people just remember what they haven't seen or what have you. But I think Ixian's definitely an advanced because if you can't play them well at all, then they just not a good faction at all. And there's no
Yeah,
way a new player is going to be doing any sort of productive memorization on their first game.
yeah. I think even with a lot of intermediate players I've played with, sometimes you'll say like, could Harkonnen have a poison weapon? And if Ix is your ally, and the answer is often just, I don't know.
I
um,
don't
which, I mean, if they were Atrades, though, they would say, he has 3 pocket cards. One of those could be poison weapon. And I've seen 3 of the poison weapons, so there's one out that he could have. They would be able to tell me that. But if they were Ix, they would just say, I don't know. Versus with a more experienced player playing Ix, they would probably know, like 7 of Harkonnen's cards and probably could tell you almost definitively whether Harkonnen had that poison weapon or not. And I think it's a huge difference. That's where the Ixians become really good.
They could.
Yeah, I think for me, I probably, man, that's tough because I mean, Atrades is probably the most obvious like faction that you could compare them to because there's a lot of parallels. I mean, their leader pool is identical, right? It's just the difference is one of them gets star troops that they can sacrifice their suboids to keep around if they win the battle, and the other one gets the Kwisatz Haderach, which is the +2, and then the non-traderable leader. I don't know. This is tough. I think for me, I probably put them on the same like ladder as Atrades, because I think both of them have their own particular stress points. And I agree, like if you don't have a good memory or if you're not super familiar with the treachery deck as a beginner, it can get a little overwhelming because if I'm a beginner and I just see like a bunch of red cards and I'm like, these look bad. Oh, the laser gun. Let me take the laser gun and I'll send everything else out. And then later on an ally and someone's like, hey, how many projectile weapons were there? And I'm like, I don't know. Everything was scary and I don't remember what it was. Right. Like that's a real thing, that could happen. But I also don't think that they're nearly as complex as like the BG either. So I don't know that I would necessarily put them in the advanced tier. Um, but I don't necessarily. I could see somebody playing them and just being like, this is way too much for me. Like, this is too confusing. I don't get the cyborgs. Like, which card am I supposed to put on top or bottom? Why would I want to do that? And then even their deployment, right? Like, because they have the hidden mobile stronghold. So where you place is oftentimes based on other factions that are in the game and who could potentially threaten you if, let's say, you go first in the turn order and you don't protect the HMS, and then all of a sudden somebody walks a pile of guys in there and, they beat you out of there, and it's like, well, now you got to ship guys back in to try to fight them to get it back. So yeah, they're kind of a razor's edge faction. I don't know. I would put them. Where was Atrades at, Jack? Did you guys put them in advanced or intermediate?
They're sort of in between.
In between. That's probably where I would put Ix.
What I will say about the Ixians is that even in the hands of a novice player, they can be very effective. And I think if a novice player going for the win in rounds 1, 2, or 3 with the Ixians, they got a pretty good shot at a solo win. They're starting with a good card. They've got powerful forces that at their disposal. They've got their own stronghold, which is the hardest one to get to for everybody else. So those are reasons why for me, pulled the Ixians down into intermediate. It's just because I think that if you've got some understanding of the game, that you can leverage it pretty effectively.
I mean, the dream for them is you want Shield Snooper to be in the initial draw, and then you can guarantee you have safe leaders all through the first couple rounds. And, and then you're just going to put a bunch of weapons out in the row and try to get one for yourself. I mean, and that sometimes happens. And I guess that a novice player could take advantage of that. But I still feel that that's still more difficult to take advantage of than the Atrades. Like, just keep track of who gets what card. Like, I rarely see Atrades like really played particularly bad or like not taking full advantage of all of their abilities. Whereas someone like Bene Gesserit is, I think, a lot more difficult to get at everything except for voice. And I think Ixian is really like near the top there. I have to agree with Gary putting it in advanced, just because like the card knowledge aspect is hard to take advantage of. Aside from the dream scenario where you have Shield Snooper, or you've successfully kept all the shields out and you have a projectile weapon or something like that. But even then, like, their leaders are not safe to traitor. So you have to worry about who you think might have picked what. Potentially you're only using your 5s just due to that, versus players who have either revealed their traitor or you have some info on, or if you had a safe at the beginning. Even then, it could still be a face dancer. I feel like they have a lot of opportunity to fall into pitfalls. Even their setup, putting the HMS in the wrong place, could be almost game over from the beginning. Because sometimes they lose it so fast, especially if you put it near Atrades. Because Atrades wants the Quizax, and they're sending everyone from Harkonnen into your stronghold, and they're probably going to have it the rest of the game. And now they have Quizax Haderach too. And potentially they're going to figure out what you have, in your pocket card as well. It's just going to ask you what your weapon is. And if you say like projectile, they now foreknow that you started with that. It gives them a really good idea of what the initial row was as well. Because now as soon as you say projectile weapon as your starting card to Atrades, they're going to assume the starting row of pocket cards has no shields in it. And they can cross out shield for everyone else and quickly get way ahead of you.
You did have them on intermediate earlier in our text discussion, but all right, let's move on.
Cyborgs and subvoids. You cannot convince me that is not advanced.
Yes, it could be.
I think they just have to be above Atrades. That's my opinion. But
all right, let's move on to Chome. Now, Chome, Gary put as a beginner one. Boy, our dummy put them as an intermediate one. I put Chome into the beginner pot. And again, it's economy. Again, it's a very straightforward approach to the economy. Not much you can mess up there. You do have the, all right, when will I use that inflation token? That's a question that could be hotly debated, even amongst advanced players. You've got the sort of safety net of I can bid on whatever. If everyone thinks this is a lousy card, it's actually probably not too bad for me. Both because if it is a worthless card, I've got the option of either discarding it for spice later on or using it in a special way. And if it's something else like a cheap hero or what have you, I've got the 5-card hand limit, so I've got space for a dud or two or something like atomics or weather control that I don't necessarily want to play right away, but I can tuck it away knowing I've got room for more weapons and defenses down the road. And, with the auditor, if the auditor gets killed, you still are auditing, you can get it back. So I think it's, if you've got what are we going to pick for the new player? I think Chome makes a pretty good choice. Although I will mention that Captain Cole put Chome in the advanced column during our earlier discussions, but I'm curious to see where it ends up now. But Jaded, let me ask you, because you came in, you joined our playtesting during the final stages of Chome's development. Where does Chome rate for you?
I'm gonna put him in intermediate because there's a lot of padding on them. They're a coffee table made for a toddler. There's no sharp edges, but I think there's also the potential for the death spiral. And anybody who's played Chome and had a bad time knows exactly what I'm talking about. You get a lot of free spice every turn. You get 12 spice, in a 6-player game, at least, not at least, at most. But at the same time, you have to spend that money on everything. So it's kind of like you get your allowance for the week, and if you're not careful, you can spend it all on Monday and be like, shoot, I need to ship some forces to stop a win, and I don't even have 2 spice to rub together.
No, but they do have 2 spice to rub together. In fact, somebody in their same situation only would have 2 spice to rub together, but they're probably going to get 10 spice or more. So if they have all their forces in the tanks, they can get half of them out in one round. I mean, yes, they're not able to do anything else that round, but they're not having to be like, what do I save that 2 spice for? Low bid and hoping everyone else has a full hand, shipping 2 guys down, or reviving 1 extra force above my free revival. They can do any of those things. They probably can't do more than 1, but they can definitely buy a card. They can definitely ship forces down somewhere. They have spice to spice dial in a battle, so it's a very forgiving faction, more so than just about everybody else. They've got, you can let things get away because early on you're like, oh, I've got all my forces and I can ship and I can buy 2 cards this round and I can do it all again. And you get spoiled early on. And when you have a huge setback where you've lost all your cards and all your forces, at least you'll still have spice, which again is the thing that is going to make anything possible, any way to get back into the game. It is just going to be, it's going to take you a couple of rounds, but it's going to be quicker than anybody else would. And I think that's the sort of thing a new player, they'll make those mistakes and they'll get in that situation, but they'll be able to extract themselves and not feel like, well, that's it, I'm out of the game, there's nothing I can do. I'm on Chome Charity, I got no cards, I got all my guys in the tanks. I don't think they're going to have that same level of despair that a new player will find themselves in playing with just about anybody else.
Yeah. For a lot of the same reasons that Jack is saying, I'd change my suggestion from advanced down to intermediate, just because they're super forgiving. It hasn't even been mentioned yet, but they're one of only 2 factions that can revive their entire stack every turn if they want to. So the cost of losing 10 people in a battle is extremely low. As Fremen, for example, losing 10 is crippling because your big advantage is this huge numbers you can put into battle so easily and cheaply. And then, if you only have 5 people in supply, you're not really in a position to go for a win. But as Chome, you can have 5 people in supply. You can revive 15 more, ship them all this turn. It's no big deal. you can always recover. And you also having that fifth card for forgiveness. I think the only reason I wouldn't put them in beginner, though, is I think they're kind of like a lot of times like playing Emperor on hard mode. Their advantages are like, yes, you can get a good hand more easily, but because of the flexibility with the extra card. But any other faction can get a good hand too, and some of them have a little bit better. Like for Ixians, have their advantages can be leveraged to even do better to get a better hand, and to know exactly what cards they want at the moment. I think the big thing with the Chome, like they can put them over the top, that makes them powerful, is all those worthless card advantages, and knowing when to use them and how to use them. And I think that's not very beginner friendly. And the other thing is just positioning them to manage their economy, so that they're not going over the top with the kill and revive. But they can be so forgiving, though. I think they're definitely not advanced. I'd have to agree with you on most of what you said about how forgiving they are.
Yeah, I think for me, when I first played them, I probably put them in the intermediate. As I played them more, I would probably describe them as the most nuanced beginner-friendly faction in the game. One thing that can oftentimes get forgotten, but it's very important that you as a Chome player keep track of it, is you get paid for spice dialing. You get half of it rounded down. So similar to Tleilaxu, you are kind of also incentivized to like get people to start fighting, or at the very least, you are rewarded for that. Your leader spread isn't very high, but it also means that like losing a particular leader is not backbreakingly crippling. Like if you're playing guild and you lose Staben, going from a 5 to a 3 can be very, very rough, but they have 2 4s and 2 3s. So it pads it a little bit. You do have to pay for everything. You do have access to the special worthless card abilities that only scale if you add in the 15 card extra treachery cards. And I think really with them, they make a pretty compelling ally, because not only are they rich and they can pay for stuff with you, they can also trade a particular card. So if they've got duplicate shields, duplicate weapons, or if there's something you're about to go into a battle and you're like, hey, like I really need artillery strike, or hey, I really, really need the laser gun if you got it, because I know they don't have a shield, and like the only other weapon I have is a poison weapon, and I know they got a snooper. You can work those things out, and they can pay for your spice styling. So they're really compelling ally to get. But to echo what Jaded said, when you do have bad games with them, you can really feel like you're down in the dirt. But it's not impossible for you to recover. It's not quite like Tleilaxu level of bouncing back, but kind of what Captain was saying, it's like if the Fremen and them are put in a similar position, they're going to have a much easier time recouping, getting cards back into their hand, digging their forces out of the tanks. For them, I think it's just a matter of trying to get on the board, hold what you got, and then trying to find an ally that can really push you guys over to the end, because as supportive as they are, they themselves don't have any, nasty tricks that they can bring. It's not like you're allied with Atrades and you're like, oh, we got we got combat powers now. It's like, well, I got a lot of money and I can give you this card if you need it. But they're, I think I probably just settle on beginner with them, but they're very, very nuanced.
Well, I think that the trading thing is very powerful too. Like any faction other than Atrades, after that trade, is going to have a really hard time figuring out what you or your ally have, even if you've revealed cards in a previous battle right before you trade. You think, okay, maybe you gave Chome one of those, but we're not sure which one.
All right, well, let's switch up gears here, because we're going to come to one of our other unanimous factions, and that is everybody seemed to be on the same page that Richess was not a faction to put in the hands of a beginner player. Even an intermediate player is better off playing somebody else like Chome. So Richess, an advanced faction, and that is for a couple of reasons. One is that they don't have, they start off with very little spice, no board presence, and they basically have two advantages. One is selling of cards, and one is using the no field tokens to ship. And so it's how do you choose which cards to sell and how to get the most out of it with also not arming your enemies. And then the second is to really leverage those no-field tokens in an interesting and effective way. You want to get a lot of forces onto the planet cheaply, but you also want to take advantage of, to realize you can't use that 5 token every round. So how do you be creative with swapping it out with the 0 or the 3, and how to use that 0 token effectively? And it can be very powerful tool for the Richess. None of that is obvious to many players, and even intermediate players have a hard time winning with Richess. So it's got its work cut out for it.
I think that the winning is maybe more of a balanced discussion, and maybe they're would generally be rated a little bit low. But I really honestly feel like this could be one of the easier ones, just because they're not doing a whole lot early on, because they can't, because they don't have any real advantage for the first round. They're always going to be dropping that 5 in order to get some troops out and start to build a presence on the board. They're trying to save up their money. They're trying to sell a few cards. The only thing is, a lot of times if other players don't know exactly what their cards do, and they don't explain the card power that well to everyone, things can be undervalued. Like the Samuda Drug is a very strong card, but if they just throw it out there and nobody knows what it does, and people are paying 2 spice for it, that could certainly hurt them. But I still feel it like they're one that if you explain to everyone, okay, this is what Stoneburner does, this is what Samuda, Nolan Tribiox, the Karama does for Richess, a beginner player can figure out that, okay, I need to try to get Stoneburner in my alliance. I need to try to get these cards in a certain place so that I can get an advantage out of them. And there's a common thing that people figure out early on too, is with the shield snooper, the portable snooper, you can sell that to get an idea of who has a snooper, because the people that don't have snoopers will tend to bid more for it. Also, people that have poison weapons will bid more for it. So you can get information out of that one, and to some degree, some of the others as well. The only thing is that if you don't talk about the Stoneburner at all, a beginner player that sells Stoneburner the first turn can quickly turn that card into an Atrades advantage rather than a Richess one. So they do have a few pitfalls like that they can fall easily into. But I think that most of the factions, except for we were talking about how Tleilaxu is so forgiving, but most factions have some big pitfalls they can fall into. And I wouldn't put them in advance just because they have a few challenging mistakes they can make.
I think they go in advance just because playing them well requires you to know which cards to sell at what point in time. And if you're a new player, there's just you have no way to know what those cards are. All it takes is a new player saying, "Ooh, Stoneburner, that's cool. Let me sell that first," and you've got a good chance of, basically ruining the game because the strongest player now has one of the best combat cards in the game, and then boom, it's over.
You're not ruining it just for yourself, though. You're ruining it for
everyone. Yeah,
not Atrades. Yeah, because now when it comes back, Atrades is going to be steering that card, and it's truly just an advantage for them. You completely lost the advantage, surrendered it on your own. So yeah, you can make that mistake, but there's a lot of others that can make, for example, we talk about the Fremen maybe not going in advance, even though they can make huge mistakes early on, and that can be game. But that Richess mistake does not affect Richess only. And it's also something that if you asked anyone hey, give me a 5-minute explanation of how to play a faction well, I think I explained to somebody in 5 minutes how to play Fremen well, they're still probably going to have struggled the first game. If I explain to somebody in 5 minutes how to play Richess well, I don't think they'll struggle. They'll they'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I tell them, don't sell Stoneburner right away because you want to make sure that goes in your alliance. But even if I make sure rules-wise they understand what the card does, they'll be like, whoa, wait a second. This means I win the battle and I don't lose troops. And then you say yes. Like, you don't even have to give them strategy advice. Most people will realize that they want to acquire that card, and therefore it should not be the first card up for bid. It should be a card that they're putting up for bid when they have a chance of winning it.
All right, in the interest of time,
Yeah.
let's zip through these last two. So ECAZ was another one that many of the people rated as an advanced faction. Gary put it under intermediate. It's similar to the issues with Richess, with like understanding when and where to do stuff. With ECAZ, that's the ambassadors. You've got the 6 ambassadors, 5 random, and then of course your own. What order to put them out, where to put them, how quickly you think they're going to be triggered, how to get that benefit. Do you need that benefit right now, or is this something for later on? That's the sort of thing that keeps it from a beginner. Figuring out how to really, your best bet is to get into an alliance. How quickly can you make that happen, and who should it be? How do you sell that? These are all definitely intermediate elements, and all of it put together does kind of push it towards advance. It's not none of it is terribly complicated, but it's that fine line of figuring out how to best, not only how to best play ECAZ, but how to win with ECAZ that has it dance along that advanced border there.
Yeah, I definitely put them at the top. I think a lot of what I was just saying about Richess, I'd actually flip the other way with ECAZ. Like, not only where to put their tokens, but how to use it. Like, how to properly utilize their ECAZ token is not super obvious. When to put it out is different per game, and you have to kind of like tactically adjust it. Yeah, so like Richess is like, okay, you want to get that Stoneburner card. But ECAZ is like, they probably do want to put down that ECAZ token, but where do they even put it and when? And I think that's actually like very challenging for beginner player. I think I put them at advanced before, and I don't know. I think a lot of other people did too. I definitely put them at advanced still.
Jaded.
So I'm gonna have.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, as ECAZ's strongest soldier, I will put them in intermediate. Yes, they're complicated, but I think a lot of what they do is kind of intuitive and self-explanatory. Oh, I've got a token where when somebody walks into it, I get to revive a leader. Okay, well, I think I know when is a good time to use that. I'm strong as an ally, and me and my ally can group up together. Like, you will do well if you just use the abilities the way they intuitively seem good, if that makes any sense. Like if you just always try to group up with an ally in a stronghold, you will do better because it's tough to break that open. You don't need to know all the strategic kind of nuances of how best to place the tokens and when to ally and whatnot. I think they're is pretty intuitive, and also they have a lot of tools at their disposal. They have ways to draw cards and then winning bids. They have ways to revive leaders and get forces moved around easily. So that's why I say intermediate, even though they do seem like an advanced faction.
I think a lot of their strongest things. So like, I think with Richess, I was trying to say like, okay, the strongest thing Stoneburner, it's pretty easy to figure out how to heavily utilize this. I think with ECAZ, it's very much the opposite because like their ally token, if you see an opportunity, you almost want to rush that early and try to do a win turn 1 or 2 before others can ally. But you don't want to necessarily always do that. So there's quite a bit of nuance there. But then it also has a lot of strength. And once you are allied,
Mr. Nobody.
He got
all right. So here's my hot take. Okay. I would say, Jaded, I am probably the same kind of big fan for Richess that you are for ECAZ. I think, and I used to think that Richess was like the number one most complicated, or the faction that was the hardest to do well with. I actually think that title is with
teleport
ECAZ.
to a stronghold.
Oh, we got him back. Wait, Captain.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you dropped
You,
out,
you
Captain.
cut out. You're in the middle of talking, and then you dropped out.
Oh, I did? Oh, sorry. Well, I was saying
Yeah.
that the Fremen token is very strong, but also not obvious, like how to really utilize it. But if you have a stack sitting in an inconvenient place for others to attack you, and you put that on a central stronghold like Carthag, then anybody that wants to, like, let's say you have one guy there that's just co-occupying with your ally just to form co-occupation. Okay, well, now you could potentially break alliance and use your ECAZ token. You also have the ability to make it so if anyone tries to actually fight there, alternatively, you can put a Fremen token on it. And then now, if they ship or move into Carthag, you get to teleport that giant stack into another stronghold. And so it's like a deterrent, but also potentially sets up a win. It's obviously stronger the more less people really care about triggering certain tokens. But like that token can be very good. The spacing one can be very good depending on where you put it. And you can also utilize the Harkonnen and Atrades ones to somewhat block strongholds, but also put the Atrades one in a way that, like, okay, they come in to fight you for like a win stop battle, and you're going to know their hand, and that is a pretty significant advantage. Is you're only really knowing their hand usually in these like going for the win battles. So like the positioning of them is, I think, difficult, and also getting full value out of each ambassador. I think the co-occupy though is pretty straightforward, but I think because the ambassadors, I put them at advanced.
I mean, I just can't see a world
Yeah.
in which they're as hard to play as BG or Ixians, you know?
I
Or even
So I'm not
Atrades.
going to speak. I'm
Ixian,
not going
I
to speak for
agree is
anyone
one.
else, but so I'll come back to that here in a second. But what I was going to say in the captain's absence is basically I think there's a lot of decision space with the ambassadors. The other thing too is the players at the table can kind of play around the ambassadors, because they still have the limitation of you, your ally, or the faction that is on the token. Yep, right. Like, so if you put the Gil one down, Gil can't trigger it, you can't trigger it, and your ally can't trigger it. So there's some interplay there, and I think that you're opening decisions, like the ambassadors you place down, how much spice you end up spending for a card. I think those things really really matter, because I have seen games where nobody was necessarily interested in allying with the ECAS. They ended up spending a lot of spice, and they weren't really able to like get into any place to hold it to incentivize somebody to come like be their ally. But I've also seen games where it's like turn one, hey Atrades, like, do you want to ally? Like, yeah, sure, okay, let me put the ambassador here, you just send down, and then I'll walk from the Imperial Basin in, and like boom, now we have Arcane, and who's really going to come fight us. But I think a lot of the decision space with them is really how to best leverage those ambassador tokens. I do really think it's cool that they get a safe leader, and not only is it a safe leader from being a traitor, but it's a safe leader from being a face dancer. So you kind of always have that in your back pocket. But I have seen some people, and I came to realize this as I started playing them too. I think you actually have to be very aware at how many troops you are sending in to co-occupy with your ally, because I do think it is easy for you to kind of maybe send a little too many. People will go over there, even if it's like a throne fight, you still have to sacrifice half your stack. Like, that is just a rule that's on their card. And on top of that, I have seen it too, where if people want to betray you as an ally and they're going after you and you've reinforced and someone comes to fight you, they're like, yeah, I'll just like leave a guy there and then get out of there. And then if you choose to fight, you still have to spend half of your stack. Their guy's probably going to die anyway. But if your hand's not good, you might want to incentivize them to fight. But then if they end up throwing the fight because they no longer value the alliance, then it's like, 6 of your guys are now in the tank and they only really lost a guy and they threw away a cheap hero. So I think there's some pitfalls that can happen with ECAS that are kind of unique to them because of that alliance ability. And I agree. I do think that if you do sort of follow sort of the ledger of like, okay, place Tleilaxu token here. If guy goes there, get leader and guys back, right? Or place guild token here. If someone comes, reinforce here or ship over here to get spice. Now, I do agree with that, but I think to the captain's point, I think that there are a lot of decision spaces that make it a lot more complicated than you would think just reading about them on paper.
All right, let's go finally with our final faction, which most of the consensus with the other playtesters was that they were intermediate. I can see an argument for them being a relatively decent choice for a beginner because, again, not too complicated what they do. A lot of it's just a matter of, all right, at the end of each round, what terror token do I put out? Where do I put it? You do have to have some foresight about how to employ that. And that goes hand in hand with how are you going to leverage enemy of my enemy, because that is one of their most insidious and powerful and undervalued, in some cases, advantages. The other main thing that they're doing is with the assassination of leaders, using their traitor cards for that. And, they're getting into fights just to pick off a leader and get some spice for it. Again, effectively using these advantages is what starts to elevate a faction up to intermediate, more towards advanced. And so because, similar to what Jade had said earlier with Fremen has got 4 very straightforward things and 4 very more complex things, that's why they fall into the intermediate. I kind of feel the same way with Moritani. But again, Jade, let me start with you and where you would drop the Viscount.
Yeah. I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to put him in beginner. I don't really see any reason. They start with a lot of spice. They start with forces on the board wherever they want them. You just put tokens down on top of you, and by default, people that are probably not going to attack you. I think they're a perfectly good beginner faction. They're definitely not in the same rung as Fremen, I'd say, and the other intermediate factions. Simple abilities, and they're easy to use effectively. Because again, I think we're talking about skill floor here. It's just the minimum amount of skill you need to use the faction decently. And for Moritani, I think it's very, very low.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on most of that. That I think that if you explain to them, it's similar to Richess. It's just like, hey, explain to them what all the tear tokens do at the beginning. And once you have a good idea rules-wise of how the faction works, then you can do pretty well. I guess the big beginner mistake is maybe underestimating enemy, which I do consider to be like their strongest advantage. And, maybe underutilizing that potentially is where I'd maybe lean towards putting them in intermediate. But I definitely put them below most of what's in intermediate right now. So maybe a most beginner.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I do think that they're a lot more conceptually simpler than where the Fremen are at. They're more complicated than the Emperor. They're maybe a step up from the Harkonnen because they have the tokens and the assassinate leaders as opposed to the extra treachery cards and the extra traitors. And their terror tokens are a lot of fun. I mean, they all can't be atomics, but it's like Schrodinger's tokens. Like they are both simultaneously all atomics, and none of them are atomics. And you only find out after it's too late. But yeah, they're a blast to play. They're really, really, really fun. They're very intuitive. Jaded, how you described ECAZ earlier is how I feel about these guys. I feel like they're very easy to just sort of like grok and just kind of pick up and just kind of go with, and I think once you get used to the symbols on the sheet, because I still get robbery and yeah, like I get them confused because I look
Extortion,
and I'm like, they kind of look the same, but yeah, I'm like I can't remember which one's which, and then I'm always like double checking and like looking, but no, once you get past that, no, they're pretty easy, to get under your fingertips. So yeah, I definitely say they're a very beginner friendly faction.
what the heck does that hexagon mean anyways?
Yep. Yeah. Read the books. Yeah. So we have an interesting, if we just kind of go with, we didn't have a ton of consensus other than maybe Emperor. But if we look at where we settled with our kind of timeline of complexity here, with all the other factions, if you said, yeah, let's maybe upgrade. If you wanted to do 4, 4, and 4, I think we would probably end up with these groupings here. Or at least that's how I would probably end up putting them on there. And then maybe the guide for the complexity ratings would have some insights with some tidbits for why this, why that, or what to think about, if you are a newer player using a more advanced one, what should you be paying extra special attention to in order to get the most out of that faction. Certainly we could probably swap around a couple of these, maybe it would end up like that, or, this could be, one of these could be more intermediate. Like I said, a lot of people rated ECAZ as more advanced, but, I agree with Jaded that I think that I would only bump them up to advanced if, like everybody was intermediate for some reason. But this is relatively straightforward. And again, if they had instead of giving the Fremen player a gun and having them play out in the desert, they put one to my head and said, you have to put 4 in each is probably where I would settle. But yeah, it's an interesting. But yeah, if you've made it through this entire video and have some thoughts, please share your rankings of the complexity level for beginners and advanced players and those in between. Where do you disagree, and validate us with where you do agree. And we may revisit this and see how things are going. We may look at other criteria as well. So by all means, let us know. As we said, we were factoring in using all of the advanced advantages for that faction, which a lot of times when new players are tackling Dune, they start with the basic rules. And if we just did this as basic, we might have a slightly different. I don't think it would be wildly different, but some of these might end up upgrading or downgrading. Yeah, this was a pretty good discussion, and let us know any other topics you would like Battle Language to address for Dune. And once again, make sure that you're following the Game Found and chiming in there with what you hope to see in the campaign. So thank you once again to Jaded and Captain Cold and Mr. Nobody for taking part in our discussion. That's going to be it for this one, everyone. Thanks again, and hopefully we will see you again soon.